Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in St-Emilion and we're looking at the Le Dôme 2009 St-Emilion Grand Cru. The history of Le Dôme begins in 1996 at the confluence of two very different stories. The first is that of Englishman Jonathan Maltus, whose life as a vigneron began in 1994 with the purchase of Château Teyssier in the commune of Vignonet in the southern part of the St-Emilion appellation. The second story is that of the Vigneron family, who were the owners of Vieux Château Mazerat and who were the ones that would have planted the lieu-dit that would eventually become the source for Le Dôme with mostly Cabernet Franc back in the 1950s. Following the death of Francis Gouteyron, who was one of the two sons in the family, this 3.965 hectare portion of Vieux Château Mazerat was put up for sale, and it was subsequently purchased by Jonathan Maltus in 1996. With a keen eye for business and perhaps a little bit of the chutzpah or that dare to be different mentality that goes along with being an outsider in Bordeaux, Jonathan believed it was possible to make a world-class wine in St-Emilion without the need for a prestigious chateau and hundreds of years of history. So with these parcels, Jonathan set out to make a small production, single vineyard, terroir-driven wine. And with that, what is possibly the purest expression of Cabernet Franc from Bordeaux was born. And the first vintage of Le Dôme was in 1996. And with this wine, Jonathan became one of the pioneers of the garagiste movement that began in the mid-1990s on Bordeaux's right bank. Now, for those that have been following this project for some time now, you will have noticed a distinct lack of Bordeaux content. And the reason for this is quite simple. While Cabernet Franc is undoubtedly a very important variety in this region, generally speaking, it plays a supporting role, with its offspring, Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, taking center stage. And my mission for this project was really to highlight Cabernet Franc as the star, primarily as a single varietal wine, but also as the dominant variety in some blends. Now, on the right bank of Bordeaux, where Cabernet Franc shines, most notably in the appellations of St-Emilion and to a lesser extent Pomerol, there are not as many examples of Cabernet Franc dominant wines as one might think. Even the illustrious Château Cheval Blanc, which is widely cited as the top expression of Cabernet Franc from Bordeaux, in the last 20 vintages, Cabernet Franc has only been more than 50% of the blend 5 times, and even then it's usually less than 60% of the blend. So why might this be? Why are there not more examples of Cabernet Franc dominant wines on the right bank of Bordeaux? Well, there's likely several reasons for this, but today I'm going to touch on two. First and foremost, there actually isn't as much Cabernet Franc planted on the right bank of Bordeaux as we typically think. Currently in the appellations of St-Emilion and St-Emilion Grand Cru, there's around 5,450 hectares under vine, and of that, around 953 hectares are planted with Cabernet Franc. That's only 18% of the vineyard area in the appellation, with the remainder being planted with predominantly Merlot. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, at least in my world it is the soils. And I recognize that soils are not a focal point of the conversation here in St-Emilion, but for the purpose of my exploration of Cabernet Franc in this appellation, this is a critical piece of the puzzle. You see, Cabernet Franc is notoriously a very site-sensitive grape variety. And with the diversity of the terroirs across the appellation, the sites where Cabernet Franc shines at its best are not as widespread as one would think. And that brings me to today's wine and where exactly we are in St-Emilion. So the appellation of St-Emilion encompasses 9 communes in the Libournais, and we're bordered to the south by the Dordogne River, and we're bordered to the north by the Barbane River. And the commune, or the appellation I should say, is about 12 kilometers wide, stretching from the eastern border of the town of Libourne, and it's about 9 kilometers from north to south. At the heart of this appellation is the commune of St-Emilion and the village of St-Emilion that sits atop the limestone plateau. And this limestone plateau is an important part of the terroir of St-Emilion, but it does not represent the whole picture. There are 4 broad groups of soils that we find in this appellation. First, we have the famous plateau of limestone, which is known locally. This limestone is known locally as calcaire à asterie. And this limestone dates to the Oligocene epoch. And this limestone starts right around the village of St-Emilion, and it stretches eastward all the way across 5 communes to the commune of Saint-Étienne-de-Lise in the east. And it is here on this limestone plateau that we find the highest concentration of the Premier Grand Cru Classé Château and the Grand Cru Classé Château, such as Château au Son. Secondly, we have the slopes, the higher slopes that descend from the limestone plateau. And these are comprised of a calcareous clay that sits atop a soft limestone bedrock that's known locally as Molasse de Françadé. Then we have the lower slopes, and this can be either sandy loams or clay loams, and this also sits atop of that molasse bedrock. Finally, we have the wide quaternary terraces that slowly step their way downward from the limestone plateau. And the first of these terraces is comprised of complex sands and gravels, and we're at elevations of around 30 to 35 meters above sea level. And this terrace is on the western and northern perimeter of the limestone plateau. So we're to the west and to the north of the St-Emilion village itself. Following this, we have other little terraces that step downward from the limestone plateau in the southern part of the St-Emilion appellation, south of the village itself. And these terraces are between 4 and 20 meters above sea level, and this is where we find predominantly recent alluvial soils that are derived from the Dordogne River floodplain. Now, at first glance, it would be easy to dismiss these quaternary terraces as being inferior to the vineyards that are on the slopes or the plateau. But we do find some prestigious chateaux on the first quaternary terrace, most notably Château Cheval Blanc and also Château Angelus. And one of the commonalities between these two properties is the greater emphasis on Cabernet Franc in the blend. And that brings me now to the Dôme. This is coming from a 3.96 hectare portion of vines, 3 hectares of which are planted with Cabernet Franc and the remainder is planted with Merlot. And where are we located? We are on the first of these quaternary terraces. We're at an elevation of around 30 to 35 meters above sea level on a gentle southwest facing slope, and we are a mere 500 meters west of the vineyards of Château Angelus. What's more is that if you look at the underlying geology of this area, the parcels where Le Dôme is located is on the same narrow vein of soils that weaves its way north-northwest right through the vineyards of Château Cheval Blanc and into Pomerol. Drilling down a little bit further to the soil specifically in this lieu-dit, we have a shallow topsoil that's a clayey sand, that's sableau argileux in French. And then we have at about 40 centimeters, we have a deep clay subsoil that's also comprised of layers of an iron-rich rock, which is known locally as crasse de fer. These soils combine that beautiful balance of drainage as well as moisture retention capacity. And the vineyard plantings here were planted by the Gouteyron family in the mid-1950s. And since Jonathan Maltus purchased these parcels in 1996, he has not changed anything about the vineyard plantings or how the vineyard was laid out. Now, when it comes to the finished wine, there's a lot of attention to detail that goes into harvest as well as what's happening in the cellar. So first and foremost, the yields are kept pretty low, around 28 to 30 hectoliters per hectare. The fruit is all hand harvested and it is destemmed, and it is meticulously sorted. It's sorted 3 times, in fact. They sort the clusters before destemming, and then they subsequently sort the berries individually twice before it's transferred into the fermentation vessels. They do transfer the berries via gravity into the fermentation vessels. This is in order to make sure the berries stay whole and intact. And then the berries undergo a cold soak for about 5 days in advance of alcoholic fermentation. The alcoholic fermentation in 2009 would have been in temperature control oak vats. They now do the fermentation in stainless steel. The time on skins is about 35 days. They would do some regular pigeage and pump overs during that time as well in order to aid extraction. And the maturation takes place over 18 months in 225-liter French oak barriques, of which 80% is new. So let's get into this wine. Now, so on the nose, it has a gorgeous perfume. That is the Cabernet Franc essence coming through, that beautiful fragrance. And you immediately sense that this is coming from either a warmer vintage or a warmer climate for sure. And 2009 was indeed a warmer vintage in Bordeaux. The nose has a slightly sweeter fruit profile, a mix of red and dark fruits. I'm getting a little bit of some cherry here. There's a wild raspberry note, touch of plum as well. And there is a beautiful underlying savoriness and herbaceousness, and that is, again, the DNA of the Cabernet Franc coming through. I love the notes that I'm getting here. A bit of cedar wood, cedar leaves. There's a touch of cypress here as well. There's a little bit of an herbal note like marjoram. There's also a little bit of that sweet cured tobacco note, which I love when Cabernet Franc does that. And there's also a lovely perfume to the nose as well, but it's not coming through as violets. It's more like a peony note for me. On the palate, wow, this is has such a beautiful texture to it. The fruits come through bang on as they did on the nose. There's a nice purity of fruit. There is a richness to the fruit, which I quite like. There is a bit of an opulence to the fruit, which I think is gorgeous. And in terms of the tertiary layers, we are getting into some tertiary elements here. This is the 2009, so we should be expecting certainly some tertiary notes. So I'm getting a little bit of like a cocoa note. There's a bit of like a cured black olive thing going on, a touch of graphite as well. There's also a really beautiful underlying spice element to the wine, and that could be a bit of the oak influence coming through, but sometimes when Cabernet Franc is on more iron-rich soils, I tend to get a little bit more of a spicier profile. So I'm getting a bit of baking spice notes like clove, allspice, stuff like that. I'm also getting a little bit of like a black and green peppercorn thing going on, which I really quite like. In terms of the structure of this wine, the acidity is really persistent, energetic, nice mouth-watering feel to it. The tannins are gorgeous, very silky in the mouth, quite graceful, and there is a good amount of tannin here. You know, they did do some extractive techniques, so there's a good amount of tannin, but the tannins are so finely woven, super fine grain, and they have like a cashmere-like texture to them, and a nice little tug on the finish as well. Considering this is a 2009, this wine still has a lot of life and vibrancy in it, and I think you could easily hold this for at least another 15 years, probably even longer than that, because the fruit is still quite fresh. There's a lot of structure here. It's just gorgeous. The stance of this wine is, you know it's Bordeaux. Like, there is a Bordeaux energy to it. There's something kind of regal about it, something confident, something a bit more assertive that sort of shows me that it's Bordeaux, but at the same time, the Cabernet Franc is coming through as well. There's nothing about this wine that screams pretentiousness. There's a somewhat of a genuine hospitality edge to it. There's a slight companionability about this wine. There's something that feels really friendly about it. As much as it's serious, it's concentrated, it's complex, there's a lot of density going on here. And actually, I should note as well, you do feel this sumptuousness in the middle palate, which I think is our friend Merlot coming through. But it's just a gorgeous wine. It's complete, it's balanced, and as the opening act for Bordeaux in this project and the story of Cabernet Franc, I couldn't imagine a better wine to begin that conversation and begin telling that story, because Le Dôme is it. Le Dôme is one of the most important as far as Cabernet Franc is concerned on the right bank of Bordeaux. I do know there's some others out there, so if you have had some Cabernet Franc dominant wines, or even 100% Cabernet Franc from Bordeaux, let me know what wine you had in the comments below. Or if you've had the pleasure of enjoying the Le Dôme, let me know what you thought of it, what vintage you had in the comments below as well. And of course, as always, I look forward to being back again soon with another wine. Cheers.